Welcome back to PPSW, otherwise your favorite hangout place, the Space Gulag, and today we're back with our lightsaber giveaway, the second of 3. I hope you guys are ready for this one. This is, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to give away the second one. Third one goes away on July 4th, which is about a month away. So, if you want to win that lightsaber, you might as well go down below and put your entry in. Here we go, guys. Let's just do this. There are 300 entries this time. That is ridiculous. You guys are going nuts. I want to see 500 next time. And let's see if we can hit 20,000 subscribers by the next giveaway. How about we do that? Let's do this. The giveaway. We've been waiting for this. I'm excited. Who's going to win? And congratulations, RNG Lemon. 7300 on Discord. DM me and I will be sending you your very own lightsaber. If you want a chance to win, watch to the end of the video. I will tell you how to win. Enjoy this video. I worked very hard on it. It's 5:25 in the morning right now, so I worked on it all night. Anyways, guys, I love you all. Spread the love and enjoy the video. Welcome back to the Space Gulag, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite hangout place, and today we're back with another Star Wars theory. Today we are doing what if Ahsoka Tano, the Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, raised his children. Would she be better for Luke and Leia than Obi-Wan or Bail Organa, or would she fail them just as Obi-Wan and Yoda almost failed Luke? Before we begin this video, let's smash that like button, try and shoot for 2,000 likes in the first 24 hours, and I will release What If Vader Survived Return of the Jedi. This is a video you won't want to miss. We're also getting 50,000 subscribers, so join the Space Gulag if you be a part of our incredible journey together. If you have ideas for videos, leave them down below. I do read off your comments, but I don't do crossovers. And one last thing, if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon, Twitch, and community Discord. Special shout out to Benjamin Wells for being a Grand Tier supporter, and Jay Hoffman and WarPigman308 as Master of the Tier supporters on our Patreon. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. It greatly helps and funds future projects that I'm sure you guys are all going to like. If you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, watch to the end of the video and I will tell you how. We begin our story as Ahsoka and Rex finish burying the dead. Order 66 has just wiped out the entire Jedi Order, killing thousands of members, masters, knights, padawans, and younglings. They were all targets of the newly established Empire. Anakin Skywalker became Lord Vader, and no place in the Republic or in the former Separatist territory was safe for the Jedi or the mutinous clone Captain Rex. Ahsoka and Rex didn't know that Anakin turned into Vader, or that Kenobi beat Vader on Mustafar. Ahsoka and Rex looked at each other. They had a vessel and nowhere to go. While the Clone Wars were coming to an end, there were not many safe havens away from the people that could see them as criminals to be executed. The Separatists would see both of them as enemies, while the Empire would see them both as traitors. There were few places they could go, but Rex and Ahsoka decided that they would go to a planet called Polis Massa. It was a tiny planet out in the Outer Rim. It was more of an asteroid, but it was a safe place away from the Empire and away from the CIS. They loaded up their Y-Wing and prepared to go to Polis Massa. There was no talking on the journey. It was just silence. Their silence wasn't awkward. Of course Ahsoka could feel what Rex was thinking, but even she had to admit what they had just been through was extremely traumatic. Especially for Rex. He lost all of his brothers in a wreck. Most of the clones inside that ship had been serving with him and Ahsoka since the Battle of Christophsis. The worst of all is that victory was in sight. They were at the finish line, and now they were all dead. While some may say hyperspace sickness could make anyone go mad, the thoughts of Order 66 and Ahsoka and Rex sickened them to their stomachs. Rex wanted to go out and help people in the galaxy. There had to be other Jedi that survived and other clones that would mutiny against the Republic. Ahsoka in the back of the ship was proud of Rex, but she herself didn't know what she had to do. Maybe she didn't know. She wanted to help people. That was hard to do even when she was a Jedi. Harder to do as a civilian, and now it would be almost impossible because she was a target of the Empire. She had to live in the shadows, work as a ghost. Could she really do that? The ship pulled out of hyperspace and they flew down into a landing bay. There was already a ship that landed. That ship was a Corellian corvette. It looked like the Tantive 4, the personal vessel for Senator Bail Organa. Ahsoka thought it would be weird to see that out here, all the way away from the Republic, and then Rex mentioned that maybe he had rescued a Jedi. Ahsoka's heart jumped. Bail was close with Obi-Wan, so maybe Obi-Wan had survived Order 66. She was really excited, and when their Y-Wing landed, she and Rex made their way inside the building. They ran in and found themselves Senator Bail Organa, though there was no Jedi. Ahsoka called out Bail's name, his quiet face filled with joy as he saw Ahsoka with her, but the happiness turned to concern when he saw Captain Rex turn the corner. Ahsoka expressed that Rex was okay. There was nothing wrong with him. Bail didn't quite understand, but the pressing question from Ahsoka left him telling her that there was only 2 Jedi that he knew of surviving, Yoda and Obi-Wan, but only Yoda was here on Polis Massa. Ahsoka frowned. She was saddened to hear that her master Anakin Skywalker hadn't survived the Purge. Bail told Ahsoka to talk to Master Yoda, before she got the opportunity to ask him what happened to Obi-Wan, and why he wasn't on world. When Ahsoka walked up a set of stairs, she saw Grandmaster Yoda. He looked over at her, and his eyes were filled with pain. She was happy to see him, but she knew that there was something more than the execution of Order 66 that was bothering him. Yoda on the other side was so relieved to see that she was okay. He had just been talking to Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. Yoda didn't know if he could tell Ahsoka about her former master, and about what Obi-Wan Kenobi was currently doing. She could be upset with him, or she would see it their way. Of course, she would know about it already, but he knew he had to tell her. Yoda asked Ahsoka to take a seat. The slight joy in seeing Master Yoda faded. She knew herself that this would be about her former master. Of course, the worst that could have happened to him was death. Though Ahsoka heard him through the Force, it was possible that he did something that led to this? Maul seemed to think so, but the Sith were known for their lies. It was unlikely that Anakin would destroy any balance within the Force. Then Master Yoda spoke. He told Ahsoka of what had happened. He told her every heart-tearing detail of what Anakin had done. He went inside the Jedi Temple with Commander Appo and the 501st and killed everyone. With most of the Jedi Council outside of the temple, and Mace, Fisto, Kolar, and Tin missing, Anakin had only one real competitor. Master Sindralic didn't even stand a chance, though. Anakin walked in while fighting Sindralic, and he killed Sindralic's 2 Jedi compatriots and then killed him. Anakin didn't hesitate, and he didn't show any mercy. Ahsoka's eyes could be seen watering. She couldn't possibly believe that Anakin could do such a thing. He was a kind, loving, compassionate man. How could this happen? Her stage of denial was then met with a question, asking Yoda what happened to him. Surely something did. Yoda shook his head, and then told Ahsoka that Master Kenobi wanted to kill him. Ahsoka couldn't be in any more shock than what she was in. Yoda informed her of one last thing. He told her that he fought Darth Sidious, otherwise known as Chancellor Palpatine, and he lost. Ahsoka didn't know what to say. Her head was spinning. She couldn't possibly process anything. Her head fell into her hands as she looked into the darkness. Tears rolled into her hands and her breathing stiffened, holding each breath, trying to understand how any of this could be real. She just saw Anakin. It hadn't been more than a couple of days. He was so kind and gentle. He was so happy to see her, and she just left him. Denial was only just the beginning of the pain that Ahsoka would face after hearing about what her master had done. In the darkness of her hands, she could almost envision it. The students she took to Ilum to get their kyber crystals first came to her mind. Biff, Gnodi, Gungi, Katoni, Petro, Zat, all banding together as her master, Anakin Skywalker, walked in with his piercing blue lightsaber. She could imagine the younglings turning their blades against him as he deflected them, slicing them apart, just like he did everyone else inside of the temple. Ahsoka's heart broke. She looked up at Master Yoda, but she couldn't see through the cloudy vision of her eyes. Her thoughts moved on to the pain that the Jedi must have faced as the hero of the Republic looked at them and then cut them down. Even more so the clones who she served with and got to know doing the exact same thing. Her feelings of denial shifted as her heart dwelled on blaming. Ahsoka had every opportunity. More tears, streamed down her face uncontrollably. Master Yoda got up. He moved as quick as he could in his old age to get to her side. Ahsoka, in her mind, was a fire burning of fear and pain. She had the opportunity to have a message for Anakin when he needed her the most, and she wasn't there. She failed him, and she couldn't believe that with every opportunity she had to tell Obi-Wan or Yoda to deliver a message to Anakin, she failed him. She knew Anakin wasn't going to be happy about spying on the Chancellor, but he was a Sith Lord. If she wasn't uppity in the moment, maybe she could have thought to tell Obi-Wan to give a message to Anakin from her. After she captured Maul, she could have told Yoda to give a message to Anakin. Of course, she couldn't just blame herself, but everything in the moment overwhelming her, she felt like she could blame it all on herself. Master Yoda got up and got next to her and placed a small hand on her shoulder. She looked over with a broken heart inside of her chest. Maybe it was the emotion of everything that had just happened inside of the Venator that just crashed, or maybe it was the entire order being wiped out, or Obi-Wan going to kill his apprentice, but it was overwhelming. She couldn't contain it. Sure, she was a Jedi, but a few months since she left the Order, she became one with her emotionality, teaching herself to be less of a Jedi and more pure of heart. Yoda told her that she was not to blame for what happened to Skywalker. A failure it was on the Jedi Council. The Council had every opportunity to help Anakin, and they failed. Anakin fell to the dark side, and Sidious was right there when Anakin needed him most. The Jedi were right to assume Palpatine was a Sith Lord, but assumed it too late for it to make any real difference for their future. There was nothing Ahsoka needed to blame herself for when it came to this. They saw a shadow pass over. It was a Naboo starship. Ahsoka's heart began to race. She then thought about Padme, and she wondered about how Padme took all of this dissent by Anakin. Even more so, fear ran throughout her body, chills down her back as she thought, what if Anakin killed Obi-Wan? When she looked out the window, she saw Obi-Wan running out. His uniform was burnt and scarred. She looked at who was in his arms, and it was Padme. Ahsoka's sadness turned into anger when she thought, what did Anakin do to her? Of course, Ahsoka had an idea, but much like Obi-Wan, it was a secret that wasn't spoken about. Did Ahsoka know? It didn't matter. To Anakin, Ahsoka, who thought she knew, it didn't matter to her. She had feelings of attachment at certain points during the war, and she saw it as completely understandable for Anakin to fall for the young senator of Naboo. Ahsoka ran down the stairs, wiping tears away from her face as Yoda followed slowly down the stairs. Bail Organa saw Ahsoka, and then he turned around and saw Kenobi carrying Padme into one of the medical bays. She was breathing, but she was almost killed by her husband. Obi-Wan laid her down on a bed as medical droids surrounded her, immediately acting on what it was that their programming told them to do, which was save the life of Padme. Ahsoka saw Obi-Wan, who still hadn't really conceptualized the fact that she was really standing in front of him. Obi-Wan was in a completely different mindset. He was thinking about Anakin whom he left to die, and Padme making sure that she would make it, and even more so her child. What she didn't know was two twins. Obi-Wan turned around after laying Padme down to see Ahsoka, and he opened up his arms and hugged her. Sure, it wasn't the Jedi way or with the code, but at this point it really didn't matter. Kenobi was worried about her, and he needed to give her a hug. Ahsoka wasn't okay, and seeing Obi-Wan meant only one thing, that Anakin had died at the hands of his master. Yoda, who caught up, only told Obi-Wan that Ahsoka was all caught up to what had just happened. As the two let go of each other, Obi-Wan leaned against a wall, overlooking Padme's medical bay, and slid down to the floor. He was in pain of what had just happened. Yoda looked over, and so did Ahsoka. They both knew that he had to do one of the hardest, if not the hardest thing he had to do ever in his life. Obi-Wan's life was brutal, losing his master, who was giving him up for Anakin, having to train the Jedi's prophesized Chosen One without even finishing his own training, having to learn the ins and outs of being a Jedi Master to a disobedient child, losing the love of his life in the Clone Wars, and having to kill the apprentice that he himself loved as a brother. Obi-Wan held his head in his hands as Bail, Yoda, Rex, and Ahsoka gathered around him, waiting to hear about Anakin, now Lord Vader. Ahsoka was made aware of the name Vader when Obi-Wan referred to Anakin as such, as if they were two separate people. He couldn't process that Anakin could do anything so vile. Anakin was a good man. Vader was an agent of evil. Obi-Wan spoke lightly. He wanted to forget about it and let the past die. Anakin tried to take the high ground, and Obi-Wan cut him limb from limb as he fell down to the lava banks below. Obi-Wan couldn't bear to admit what happened next, but his cut legs touched the bed of lava and his garments went up in flames, consuming Anakin in pain. Obi-Wan couldn't bear to watch. He heard Anakin's screams of pain, crying out that he hated Obi-Wan. Sure, it broke his heart, but there were more pressing matters at the moment. Padme was in need of rescue, and she was going to give birth as well. While at the moment no one knew that she would have twins, Obi-Wan ushered himself over to her side to make sure that she was alright, a sort of comfort while she gave birth. Ahsoka made her way over and tried to be of assistance, as the daughter was given to Kenobi, which Padme would name Leia. Meanwhile, the son was given to Ahsoka, who she would name Luke. Padme then looked at Kenobi, telling him that there was still good in Anakin. She used her last breaths to tell Obi-Wan that she thought there was still good in the man who he believed died at the lava beds on Mustafar. Ahsoka was heartbroken by the death of Padme and Anakin. It was a true travesty to beset the Skywalker family, but now there were 2 twins and 3 Jedi, and a senator, and a clone captain to take care of them. Yoda and Obi-Wan didn't believe the time was right. Bail was a little eager to have a child, especially a daughter, because him and his wife wanted one. Ahsoka, on the other hand, knew that these children needed to grow into the people that their father yearned to be. She didn't know if the 2 Jedi would accept the terms, or if Bail Organa would lose the chance on having his own daughter, but she believed that she could be what they needed her to be. She was just as close to Anakin as Obi-Wan and Padme were. She knew him just as well, and Kenobi, appearing to be ready to give up on everything, she thought it would be best if she took the children. As the 4 sat down, Master Kenobi spoke, asking what should be done with the children. Ahsoka spoke up as she told them all that she would like the honor to take her former master's children. Yoda believed in her ability to do this, but was very skeptical of what could happen if she were caught. Yoda believed that the children should be split up in fear of Palpatine discovering them. Obi-Wan had more favor of this idea, but he trusted Ahsoka, and after all, she was Anakin's apprentice. She would be perfect as a parental figure for the children. Plus, if Ahsoka taught them balance and all the aspects, they could become very powerful adversaries to the Sith. Of course, revenge wasn't the Jedi way, but it was better than having no hope at all. Obi-Wan told Ahsoka that he would like to help her. Yoda was a bit taken aback by Obi-Wan's eagerness to trust Ahsoka with both Skywalker children. Sure, she was capable, but much like Anakin, they held the balance of everything within their grasps. Bail also thought this was a fine decision. While he always wanted a daughter of his own, he believed that if Ahsoka thought she could take care of the children, then she could. The balance of the galaxy was more important than what Bail or his wife wanted, and he was a good and honest man that believed that the galaxy would be best served if Ahsoka did what she was propositioning. It was agreed, and while the meeting wasn't done, Yoda agreed that the children of Skywalker should go with Ahsoka, with extra guidance from Obi-Wan Kenobi. Though Yoda had one more thing for Obi-Wan, and now for Ahsoka. There was an old friend who had returned from the netherworld of the Force, Qui-Gon Jinn. And technically, Qui-Gon was Ahsoka's great-grand master. Down the line, Ahsoka was taught by someone who was taught by Qui-Gon's apprentice. Yoda would also teach Ahsoka how to communicate with the late Jedi Master too. If Kenobi and her were separated, he'd be the best mentor for Ahsoka to have. He would also be a great mentor for Obi-Wan to have. And while the 2 Jedi knew Yoda was going into exile in Dagobah, they were to stay away unless there was something that they really needed. Yoda didn't handle losing the entire Jedi Order well. It was a massive pain for him. He couldn't bear it, and even more, he failed. While Yoda would learn that the greatest teacher failure was, for now he needed to be alone to discover that on his own. Bail told the Jedi that he would drop them off where it was that they wanted to be. Ahsoka told Bail and Kenobi that she would like to raise Luke and Leia among her people in the Tok'ra homeworld of Shili. Kenobi agreed to these terms, though he would like the opportunity to travel on and off world, so he would take General Grievous's starfighter. As for Captain Rex, who was there, he told Ahsoka he would take the Y-Wing and try to find his brothers who were lost amongst the stars, rallying people against the Republic. He would tell Ahsoka on his intentions to visit her when he got a chance. Everything was set in motion, while across the galaxy the howls of pain could be heard as Lord Vader found out, in his anger, he killed Padme Amidala, and as well, he killed their child. While Vader had no clue that Padme did die, but gave birth to the children of him. He didn't know, but rage coursed throughout his veins. Though his children were alive, they were going to be taken care of by his former apprentice. Bail Organa took Ahsoka and the children to Shili, where Obi-Wan said she'd meet her. Ahsoka went down to the capital city. It was pretty large, but the population hardly filled it up. Ahsoka found a small place to find refuge when she landed. The Togrutas were especially welcoming of one of their own, but they were extremely kind and loving to someone who was displaced by Order 66. Ahsoka found home with her people, but even more so, she gave home to 2 children displaced by Anakin's actions. Ahsoka would spend her early time on testing each of the children and their Force capabilities. She would use a small ball and let them use the Force with it, but nothing more. They were nothing more than infants, but their future was limitless when it came to the power of the Force. On the other side of things, Kenobi spent some time out and about, using General Grievous as starfighter to help the Jedi. During this time, he and Rex spent time helping the Bad Batch on a trash roll before Rex and him left on other missions. Kenobi was fond of helping clones after he learned of the inhibitor chip issue. He believed that they were good men, and that they could be saved, though there were many Jedi that were still out in the galaxy, and they also needed to be saved from the Sith, and now the rule of the titled Empire and its legions of clone troopers. Kenobi still struggled with everything that had happened to him, but as the months turned to years and his service with Rex reminded him of what it was like to help the people of the galaxy before the Clone Wars, and even more so before he lost his master. Working on peaceful and hope-giving missions with Rex made him remember the importance of the Jedi morals, something that he lost when his master was gutted in front of him, and he had to become a teacher to the prophesized Chosen One. Rex and Kenobi built a bond of brotherhood that only reminded Obi-Wan of the brother he lost in Anakin Skywalker. On Shili, as the years kept going, Ahsoka would carry on the tradition of teaching Luke and Leia in the ways of the Force, showing them the complication of different lessons and carrying out in her own training. Ahsoka herself grew into a powerful Force user as well, someone who didn't associate with the light or the dark, a messenger of the Force. Ahsoka was growing into the closest living being to a will in the Force. While she hadn't traveled down the complicated path that Yoda had to, she understood perfect balance. Ahsoka hadn't heard from Master Yoda in a long while, so she assumed he was alright. The Force guided her movements, and she had her first interaction with her great Grandmaster, Qui-Gon Jinn, after about 4 years. He was obviously still believing that Anakin was the Chosen One and would bring balance to the Force, but because Ahsoka hadn't learned of her former master's survival, he kept the truth from her. He did this because as Luke and Leia grew, Ahsoka would tell them stories of their real parents. Luke and Leia grew up seeing Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala as heroes of the former Republic, and for the entire time, they really were heroes. Qui-Gon, when he interacted with Ahsoka, told her to keep journeying through the Force and let it guide all of her movements. Without explicitly speaking of details, he told her that the Force would be brought back into balance if she continued down this path. Teaching the children of Skywalker was a task to behold, and he congratulated her on her courage and her ability to so uniquely power with the Force. Qui-Gon didn't have much to say to Ahsoka. She was on the right path, and there was no denying that both her master and her leaving the Order took her into a mindset unlike any other Jedi, Sith, or Force wielder in history. Ahsoka hadn't used a lightsaber since the fall of the Republic, but as they sat idle in her room, the crystals inside would purify themselves and would become the color of blinding whiteness, a color of a lightsaber blade that had never been seen before. Next to her lightsaber, she had Anakin's. She would give it to his children, but she would keep it so that they would remember him. While Qui-Gon was a great inspiration to Ahsoka, her thoughts focused on what she was as a Force user, a master, and as a mother to the children of Skywalker. While it wasn't biological, family didn't have to be blood. She loved Anakin and she loved Padme like they were her own, doing this to remember these people she knew before they died at the end of the Clone Wars. Luke and Leia were young, but they were so bright. Leia was a spitting image of her mother, and while Luke didn't look like Anakin, he did have his eyes. It hurt sometimes for Ahsoka, and even more so for Kenobi when he occasionally visited. These siblings were the spitting images of their parents, and their behavior was very similar to their parents. But at the end of the day, Luke and Leia demanded Ahsoka to tell them stories about their parents. Ahsoka had thousands of stories. The beautiful thing about telling these stories is that Ahsoka began to remember the Anakin that taught her, not the one that marched into the Jedi Temple, killing every living thing. It was a travesty, but each night, a new story. While there was always one other being that made it easier to tell these stories, and that was Anakin and Padme's astromech, R2-D2. While Bail could have taken both C-3PO and R2-D2, it was decided that R2 would join Ahsoka. He belonged with the family, because he was the family of the parents. He belonged to both of them. R2 always made the story time for the children great, at which point they are both 4 years old. Ahsoka spent all of her time with the children. The Dekruta knew and understood how important these children were to the greater galaxy. And as people who faced the lashes and chains of slavery, they were willing to believe in Ahsoka to bring peace to not just their planet and colonies, but to the entire galaxy. Sure, they saw her as a Jedi, which she wasn't, but the idea, the imagery that was the former Jedi Order gave people hope, and Ahsoka was their hope. She and the children were hope for the future that wouldn't be obtainable otherwise. Ahsoka would spend days teaching the children basic knowledge and of course how to use the Force. Ahsoka loved to describe the way Obi-Wan did. The Force was like turning a light on in a dark room, and feeling that safe feeling when you're surrounded by light that you yourself created. Luke and Leia loved learning about the Force, and even more so, they loved the woman who they would call their mother. Ahsoka was their mother, and while Ahsoka didn't mind, she was also saddened that they never got to meet the people whose stories they heard every night. Luke and Leia saw it as a reward for their hard work, which really was just levitating objects and learning how to balance oneself with the guidance of the Force. Luke and Leia were inseparable from Ahsoka. Wherever she was, they were. Though, there were a couple stories that the children loved to hear more often than others. One was their father when he was a child, and he piloted a bright yellow starfighter and saved their mother's homeworld. Another favorite of theirs was the joy and, well, funny story of Padme and Anakin when they went to a massive arena to save Uncle Obi-Wan. He was a bit grumpy that day, a little annoyed, but Luke and Leia's parents were a team unlike any other, and they not only saved grumpy Uncle Obi-Wan, but a bunch of other Jedi. The Jedi in the eyes of Luke and Leia were good, but the balance that was created by Ahsoka, no, not the balance, the purity of Ahsoka was astonishing. It wasn't just a difference in wording, or even the blade color, rather, it was a difference in feeling. They could feel the difference. While Obi-Wan was a kind and gentle soul who loved both Luke and Leia equally, he wasn't quite as pure as Ahsoka. There was still fear within Obi-Wan, and inside that fear may be pain and suffering, though the Skywalker children knew not of these things. One day, though, a commotion inside of the city caught Ahsoka's attention. She told the children to remain with R2 as she wandered outside, with both of her lightsabers in tow. It was rare for a commotion to appear on planet. Most of the Togruta were peaceful people. They liked each other and they were welcoming to others. Every so often, Ahsoka may have to end a dispute or help people find a better understanding for a particular situation, but overall nothing massive. This was different. Ahsoka could feel a presence, a very familiar one, but it couldn't be. The people gathered around as they were all looking in curiosity. While this feeling took Ahsoka back a little, when she ran towards the town square, it all changed. Her eyes looked on someone she once knew. Someone who was just like her. A little older, sure, but someone who she could relate to incredibly well. When the crowd cleared, she locked eyes with the former Jedi Master Shaak Ti. Ahsoka looked at Shaak Ti and smiled gently. Shaak Ti looked back and did the same. They both walked over to each other and met in the middle of the crowd. Without having to gesture towards a hug, the two of them locked arms and held on for a while. The Togruta were special when it came to attachments, and while they had been Jedi, it had been 4 years since everything changed. Shaak Ti was so excited to see that Ahsoka had survived. Shaak Ti had been hiding out in the world of Felucia. She went there to hide out, hoping to find Aayla Secura, but found no evidence. The clones may have been kind enough to bury her, but Aayla Secura was gone. Shaak Ti found refuge in the poisonous jungles of the Eerie planet. Shaak Ti didn't come back to the Shili because she didn't want her people to suffer, but something within the forest guided her to come back home. Maybe it was Ahsoka or something else. Shaak Ti then saw the droid of Anakin Skywalker and saw two children standing next to him. Ahsoka rolled her eyes as she smiled. Luke and Leia were rebellious. I mean, what kids aren't, but just like their parents, the little rascals couldn't sit still to save their life. Yeah, a definite trait they got from their parents. Shaak Ti was a little bit confused, but she looked back at Ahsoka, who explained everything to her before they went back to see the kids. Ahsoka made it very apparent that Luke and Leia didn't know about their father's fall to the dark side. Of course, she didn't know he survived, but for now, they saw him as a hero, which was true. They just thought he was a hero until the end, which he wasn't. Shaak Ti, after hearing this, approached the children with gentility. Shaak Ti was always gentle, as a Jedi, and she cared for others, but she had no one else on Felucia. She couldn't stay on Shili for long, but she decided she would take a look at these children that Ahsoka was raising. They were incredible for their age. They were bright, cunning, extremely force-attuned, balanced, and witty. Beyond belief. Shaak Ti would have known that these were Anakin's kids without being told, based on their sassy remarks that could have been taught only by Anakin or Obi-Wan. Ahsoka told Shaak Ti that Yoda was on Dagobah while Obi-Wan was out with Captain Rex, helping others from the Empire. Shaak Ti just smiled. She was glad to hear that both Kenobi and Yoda were still alive. She was especially happy to see that Obi-Wan was still out helping people after he lost Anakin. Obi-Wan was such a bright young man when he was Qui-Gon's apprentice, so innocent and ready for anything. He wasn't ever ready for Anakin, and Shaak Ti knew that, but it could be seen in his attitude and his essence that he wasn't ready. After Qui-Gon, something changed. Maybe it was he thought he had to grow up or be better than he thought he was, but he always wanted to be the best for Anakin. Luke and Leia loved hearing about Uncle Kenobi, but this was a whole new perspective. Shaak Ti was around during Kenobi's younger years. Ahsoka wasn't. She was brought to the temple a couple years before Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon found Anakin. While the kids were bright, they didn't understand much of the concept of death, and how Obi-Wan's feelings towards being perfect for Anakin affected him. They thought so highly of Obi-Wan. He was a joy when he was around, and he made everything so fun for them. Shaak Ti stayed a while, telling stories to the Jedi Temple and the Jedi Order, exciting stories that Luke and Leia loved to hear. They were so entranced by all the information, eating it up like little rancors. Shaak Ti told Ahsoka that she would go to visit Master Yoda. It was possible that she might have more training to complete, and she wanted to know if she could be any assistance to him. Ahsoka wished Shaak Ti well, and Shaak Ti did the same for Ahsoka. Luke and Leia adored Shaak Ti, and after she left, demanded that she return someday. Ahsoka just smiled and tickled the two of them until they were tired out and then ready for bed, which, of course, they demanded another story. Ahsoka responded sassily, saying that they had enough stories during the day, and they obviously demanded to have another. Ahsoka smiled. How could she resist? She sat down on their bed with them. Their little house was small, enough for a room and a bed for Ahsoka, and a room and a bed for the twins. She asked what story they'd like to hear, and they shouted Uncle Kenobi. They wanted a new story about Obi-Wan. Ahsoka sat back and leaned against the wall their bed was next to and looked over as R2 rolled in whistling away. Ahsoka smiled, and then she looked over at them and asked if they wanted to hear a romance story. Leia was delighted, Luke not as much, but still interested. Ahsoka started off asking if they remembered that the Jedi were barred from having attachments. They both nodded. Ahsoka continued telling them that when Obi-Wan was a young man, he went to a planet called Mandalore, when he was on a mission with his master, Qui-Gon. And they were there to protect the peaceful Duchess of Mandalore, telling them that a Duchess was a powerful and wise leader, just like their mother. Obi-Wan, while on his extended mission, fell head over heels for Satine, though he said he wouldn't leave the Jedi Order unless she said the word. Now, Satine of course knew this. She loved Obi-Wan, and he loved her. They spent the entire duration of that entire mission together. They were the same. They were incredible, just like Luke and Leia's parents. They were almost a clone of each other, and that's how you knew they were meant for each other. They spoke in riddles disguised as sass, and they fought together without letting the other one get hurt. Kenobi and Satine were a match made by the Force. Luke and Leia were so drawn into the story, they had their eyes in Ahsoka's mind, reading the next line before it was spoken. After the mission, Satine and Obi-Wan thought of each other for years. They never found anybody else or set eyes on another being. They loved each other from light years away until the end. Kenobi and Satine would meet again, just as star-crossed lovers as they were. They met up in a fray caused by Satine. People didn't like her because, much like Padme, she was strong and stood up for justice in the galaxy, and for her people. Satine and Kenobi would enjoy countless missions together, but for the twins, let's call them dates, because their love for one another only grew. Ahsoka paused. She knew the story didn't have a happy ending, but in a way it did. While Satine was a martyr, passing away for her people, she told Kenobi that she always loved him. Obi-Wan always loved her too. And you could ask him, Luke interrupted, and asked what a martyr was, and Ahsoka explained. Then she continued again, saying what she said before. They could ask him about the amulet. Leia perked up, asking about what amulet. Ahsoka smiled. The amulet Satine wore with all of her outfits. He kept it, and he hasn't let go of it. It's been with Kenobi since the day she passed away. Every so often you can catch him talking to her, because he knows that somewhere out in the Force, she's always listening to him, because he has her heart, and she forever will have his. Luke and Leia lay back in bed smiling. They always wanted Uncle Kenobi to get a girlfriend, but now they knew that he had one. It made them so happy to know that Obi-Wan had a lovely woman that made him happy. Someone that made him happier than anybody else. Ahsoka smiled at the two and kissed their foreheads, telling them to get some rest before she left the room to go to her room to meditate. R2, on the other hand, stayed in their room, as he always did, the silent protector, keeping an eye on them while they slept. R2 may be a droid, but if droids had feelings, which Luke, Leia, and Ahsoka knew they did, they would know that R2-D2 loved them with all of his circuit board. Ahsoka's meditation went similarly every night. She would reach into the Force. While she had interacted with Qui-Gon in the past, it was rare for him to make any presence known to her. Ahsoka's meditation was her way of training herself to purify her Force essence. While there were things that bothered her, she always found a way to find peace in the moment and rejoice in the love of it. More over the next 6 years would go similarly. Luke and Leia were now 10 years old. They were brilliant young Force users. The last 6 years consisted of more visits from Uncle Kenobi and the now coined Auntie T. The kids loved, in quotations, their extended family. They were happy being around each other and other kids in town. Luke and Leia, though, with their special powers, found more entertainment in themselves and torturing R2-D2, lifting him up with the Force and even playing Force catch with him. Ahsoka recommended not doing this, and R2 also voiced his frustrations by playfully zapping the little goobers. Luke and Leia had a happy little family. They also, when they turned 9, were rewarded with their first trip off-world. While the galaxy had changed, Ahsoka took Luke and Leia to a place where the galaxy hadn't really changed. Instead of Ilum, she took Luke and Leia to Jedha, a place where the children would be able to find their first kyber crystal. Ahsoka would spend most of her credits to get them the proper supplies to build functioning lightsabers. Luke and Leia were so interested in lightsabers since they were born. They loved them. They were so magnificent and cool. And they looked fun, of course. Ahsoka had to teach them how to properly wield a lightsaber in the first place, and this is when they met Anakin Skywalker for the first time. Ahsoka told them from a young age that when the time was right, she would introduce them to her master and their father. They knew that Anakin was her teacher, but they never got to see him teach her. When they finally got their lightsabers, which certainly took time to build, Ahsoka pulled out an old, dusty holocron. She explained what it was. It was a file of sorts. It held information that the Jedi wanted to keep. This holocron was full of information and lessons that her master taught her. Luke and Leia walked with Ahsoka into the fields near the house. Ahsoka placed the holocron down before the twins. She was holding their lightsabers, though for the second and third time history had been made. But first, she turned on the holocron, as she saw a beacon of their father appear before them. Luke and Leia looked at each other, as if for the first time in their lives they saw their father in one another. They had seen holograms of Padme, and even small ones of Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan, but nothing like this. He was full body, spirit, and Anakin Skywalker himself. Ahsoka couldn't help but shed a tear as she watched these children she raised for 10 years see their father for the man he really was. The man who taught her how to be a great Jedi. The man who saved her on Trandoja's moon because of his training. She survived Order 66 because of his training, and now she was watching his children learn from him. Luke and Leia were obsessed with Anakin. He was incredible. His voice was soothing, but also commanding. They watched him without blinking, and their mouths hung open. They were infatuated with him. The pictures did half the justice as the man before them did. Their presence in the Force told them how incredible he really was. They watched Anakin for hours, until Ahsoka told him that it was time to learn what he had taught them. They looked at her as she handed them their lightsabers. She herself ignited her own. 4 pure white lightsabers, as they followed Anakin's basic instructions. The introduction to lightsaber combat. They caught on incredibly quick, as they picked up the teachings he taught. The first day was easy, but the lessons got harder, and with someone like Anakin Skywalker, the difficulty picked up quickly. Over the duration of the next year and a half, Luke and Leia would become formidable duelists, impressing even the likes of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Shaak Ti upon their own separate visits. One day, though, the peaceful life Ahsoka and the Skywalker children found themselves having would change. Ahsoka would be in one of the local cantinas. She would go there every other day for some blue milk and roasted pork. But this day would be different. She looked up at a holoprojector. The Empire's new champion, Lord Vader, scourges another rebellion. Ahsoka fell out of her chair. She looked up at the projector. She couldn't believe it. Of course, the Empire always had scheduled propaganda, but this was something else. The name that Obi-Wan mentioned on Polis Massa was alive. Anakin Skywalker survived. But that wasn't him. It was a metallic beast, a war-focused machine, ready to make the galaxy kneel to the power of the dark side. Ahsoka's vision got blurry as the people in the cantina rallied to her side. She had to get back to the children. She couldn't leave them alone. She had to get to them. It didn't matter why or how, but in her mind, at that moment, it was the right and only decision she could make. She had to get to them and make sure that they were safe because she couldn't believe it. From their father. He was supposed to be dead. She remembered him as being dead, but he was alive, and he was ready to make the galaxy suffer for what Obi-Wan did to him. She wondered if Shaak Ti or Obi-Wan knew about this, or if they were even safe. Ahsoka stumbled to her feet as the people watched her as they tried to stop her, trying to help her. Ahsoka stumbled outside of the cantina and looked forward, but she couldn't. The name Vader ringing through her ears. Then the echoes of Order 66 and the voice of Palpatine palpitated from her heart. She was uneasy. She stumbled and fell on the ground, covering herself in dirt. The children, they needed to be kept safe. Vader couldn't be alive. Ahsoka picked herself up. More so, she dragged herself from the ground. She panicked. She didn't know where she was. She looked up and tumbled back and saw Anakin Skywalker in front of her. When she blinked, he was gone. The children were on her mind as people tried to get a hold of her. She ran to find the children and she found R2. She ran inside and found the kids and hugged them as if she found out the fate of Anakin Skywalker. Luke and Leia were concerned. They could feel the disturbance within Ahsoka, but they didn't know what was disturbing the peace within her. They calmed her down and she relaxed, looking around and realizing that she was safe with her adopted children. Luke and Leia hugged Ahsoka as they sat on the ground next to her. They wanted to make sure she was alright. They didn't know what it was that was bothering Ahsoka, but they wanted to make sure that she was alright. Ahsoka relaxed once everything settled inside of her mind. She looked at the kids and apologized. They were worried for her, but she told them that everything was alright. She just had a really bad memory. They knew she was lying, but they decided not to press the issue. While this revelation troubled her, she continued to teach the children in the ways of the Force, though she had to ask Qui-Gon for help in this meditation. But he was nowhere to be found. Ahsoka asked through the Force for anyone to come back and guide her. Obi-Wan, Yoda, Shaak Ti, or Qui-Gon. She needed help from a master of sorts. She continued training the children until everything changed. An Imperial fleet could be seen overhead. The people fled from the city as Ahsoka tried to usher the children away. She told them to go with R2 as she made sure all the civilians got out of the city. She felt the presence of Force users, though what kind she did not know. The Empire wasn't even here for the Jedi. They were here to capture the Togruta population and force them into slave labor. Vader was here with two of his prized Inquisitors, one being the fifth brother, and the other one being the eighth sister. Vader wanted a quick and easy victory on the ground. He led his army against resistances, not against civilization. They were too easy for him, not worth his time. Meanwhile, on the ground, the population fled from stormtroopers and Inquisitors alike. Ahsoka stood in the street as people ran away, running past her. Luke and Leia caught a glimpse of her before R2 took them to a shuttle that Ahsoka had in case of emergency. R2 prepared the engines and waited for Ahsoka. They had a rendezvous location if Shili was captured by the Empire. The Jedi all knew to go to the planet Lothal in case of an Imperial invasion. While going to Dagobah would work, the Jedi needed a place that would keep Master Yoda safe, and having too many Force users could alert the Emperor or the evil Sith Lord Vader. Ahsoka made sure that all the civilians escaped, as stormtroopers, the new unit of the Imperial military, faced down Ahsoka. She looked at them without saying a word or making a movement. They all lifted their weapons, as Ahsoka steadied herself in her stance, closing her eyes. She focused on the living Force, hearing every crack, every step, every movement. The stormtroopers were going to stun her, to make her their first slave. Then, without a moment's notice, before the stormtroopers could open fire, she sent a massive wave of the Force at them, throwing all the men from their feet as they crashed into walls and buildings behind them. The 5th and 8th Inquisitors saw this. The 8th sister was enraged. She was beyond pissed. While Ahsoka didn't know who she was, she knew who Ahsoka was. And she wanted revenge. Years of conditioning in the dark side of the Force could make anyone go mad, but like most Inquisitors, she too was a former Jedi. The two Inquisitors ignited their lightsabers, approaching Ahsoka. Red illuminated the ground as they pressed forward, challenging Ahsoka. While Ahsoka lifted her hands and looked at them, waiting for their first move, the 8th sister spoke up, using Ahsoka's name, telling her that she should have gone into hiding. She should have never relented to the urge to help the people of Shili. Ahsoka didn't make a sound as the fifth brother had enough of conversation, as he swung in trying to hit Ahsoka as she rolled under the strike, igniting her lightsabers to meet the blades of the eighth sister who was behind her. The fifth brother, enraged by missing his strike, turned around to attack Ahsoka. Ahsoka was in between the two hate-filled monsters, but even Ahsoka knew that they weren't full of hate. Ahsoka balanced herself back and forth, strikes and blocking where she could and when she could. The Inquisitors stood little to no chance, but there was something so familiar about the fighting style of the eighth sister. She had a very formal style of lightsaber dueling, but her hate unbalanced it. She wasn't able to be her best duelist. Ahsoka kept both Inquisitors on edge until she cut the forearm off of the fifth brother and force-pushed him through a wall. With one Inquisitor down and one more to go, she fought the eighth sister. Ahsoka was an incredible duelist, and she showed it with her incredible ability to succeed in battle. The eighth sister fought back, but Ahsoka and the eighth sister were incredibly evenly matched duelists, but the hate and imbalance separated the two of them from being equals. While Ahsoka had the precise precision to strike using the Force as her ally, the eighth sister was unable to rally against it. Their duel was fearsome until the eighth sister was lifted from the ground. She couldn't breathe. Ahsoka stepped back and looked over to the incessant breathing, as flame troopers begun burning the city to the ground. It was Vader. The eighth sister kicked her feet in the air as she tried to grasp for air. Vader lifted her helmet off, and Ahsoka looked in the eyes of her former friend, someone who she truly cared for until she betrayed her during the Clone Wars. While it may have saved her life, being barred from the Jedi Order, it was Barriss Offee. She was the eighth sister, and she was trying to exact her revenge for being locked away by the Jedi and by Ahsoka. Vader had enough of her petulant nature. So focused on revenge, she forgot the reason that she was here. While it was uncommon for Vader to come with the Inquisitors, there was a rumor that a Togruta Master was on the surface, and Vader always liked fighting Jedi Masters himself. But it turned out that it wasn't Shaak Ti, but Ahsoka. Barriss tried her best to kick her legs to free herself, but Vader's grip was tighter than his mechanical hands. He ignited his lightsaber as he walked forward, looking at Ahsoka without taking an eye off of her. She couldn't believe that this was Anakin Skywalker. He was a beast. It always bothered her when she force-choked prisoners, but every movement, it was Anakin Skywalker inside. But now, he was pure evil. There was a hint of something else, but the fear that consumed Ahsoka wasn't helping her pick up on what else was inside of her former master. Even more so, Ahsoka was so taken aback that Barriss Offee could just become an Inquisitor. She spoke of the people of the galaxy like she cared for their well-being. She acted like the Jedi should help the people when she turned her back on them, as fast as she said the Jedi did. She couldn't believe the hypocrisy of her actions or motives. Barriss was even trained by one of the most straight-up and down Jedi in the entire Jedi Order. Luminara would have been so disappointed in her student. She already was because of the bombing, but this was a fate far worse than the bombing. She was actively pursuing the pain of others through acts of evil. Vader's breathing continued as he looked at Ahsoka and then to Barriss. He told Barriss that she would never have the revenge she sought, as he then turned her around with the Force and brought her down onto his lightsaber, which he ignited. She shrieked in pain, and as she looked at Vader and then over to Ahsoka. Barriss was a wound of the Jedi, killed by another wound created by the Jedi. Ahsoka couldn't believe what had just happened. Barriss was killed by Anakin, and now Anakin was ready to kill her. He stepped forward and thought he could test the waters. She had the option to join him again. Just like when she left the temple all those years ago, she looked at Vader and denied his request again. The hurt that filled Anakin turned Vader into an angrier beast, as the city burnt to the ground, cascading the dark night into a fury of light. Vader walked forward with heavy and clunky, nothing like the thin and agile Anakin Skywalker. He had truly been destroyed. He was not a man, he was a machine, ready to kill just like General Grievous was. That thing couldn't be Anakin. He was a good man, and nowhere near as vile as Vader. Vader looked over at Ahsoka, and then lifted his blade. Ahsoka ran and struck at him with her blades. She pushed him off balance. He was strong, and as he came back with force, crushing his blade down onto her lightsabers. Using more of his strength, he bashed down off her lightsabers, throwing her off balance and off of her feet. Vader was extremely powerful, and for being the man in a suit of armor with little flexibility, he made up with it in his ability to make the other duelists feel insignificant. Ahsoka fell back off balance. Vader was powerful, and while she made short work of the Inquisitors, they were no Vader. Inquisitors could hardly handle Padawans, but this was Vader. He killed everyone. Ahsoka looked up at Vader. She crawled back, lifting her lightsabers to defend herself as Vader raised his blade to exact the killing blow. He slammed his blade down, and without a second of hesitation, Vader went flying across the city streets as he tumbled into a burning building. Ahsoka turned around. It was Luke and Leia, with their arms outstretched. Ahsoka got up and sheathed her lightsabers as she told them to run. They needed to get off planet now. The kids turned and ran as Ahsoka told them not to look back as she felt Vader's pain as his suit met the char and ash of the fires burning around him. Vader lifted himself out of the rubble and watched as Ahsoka ran away with 2 children. They weren't her children, so whose were they? They couldn't be Kenobi's or Satine. She was dead. He could feel their power, though. He really did feel their power when they threw him across the city. But there was something special about these children. Stormtroopers continued running around, burning the city to the ground as Vader watched, silently, with his breathing overwhelming the sounds of cackling as flames danced around him. Ahsoka, Luke, and Leia boarded their ship as the Empire moved in. R2 with the controls shot the ship into the air and into space as he avoided any Imperial ships before their ship shot into hyperspace. Inside the ship, Ahsoka looked down as she sat leaned against the wall on the floor. Luke and Leia stood next to her, asking who it was that she was fighting. Ahsoka looked back with great concern. Ahsoka didn't know if she could even tell them, but they knew she would be lying if she didn't. It wasn't within Ahsoka to lie to these children, though she had been. And she never wanted to admit it. R2 came into the room after setting the ship to jump to hyperspace and looked at Ahsoka. She then spoke, telling the kids that the man inside of the large dark suit was their father. There was something she never wanted the kids to know. Anakin at the end of the war was manipulated by a lie, like everyone else. He turned his back on everyone, including Padme. In his actions, he wiped out the entire Jedi Order, almost killed their mother, and had to fight Uncle Kenobi on a planet consumed by lava. Luke and Leia were 11 and a half at this point, but they mostly understood what Ahsoka was telling them. Their father was alive, consumed by anger and revenge. The children didn't know how to react. The man that was their father wasn't there anymore. He was consumed by Darth Vader. The children looked at this particularly hard. Vader was their father. Vader was Anakin Skywalker. And while Ahsoka admitted she didn't know he had survived his encounter with Kenobi until she came home that one day so disoriented. She herself didn't believe it, while Obi-Wan faced it and took on Vader himself. Ahsoka hadn't seen him since he was leaving to rescue the Chancellor of the Republic. She never saw Anakin as Vader until now, and while she admitted she didn't justify her decisions in not telling them, she didn't want them to fear their father for his mistakes at the end of his life. She wanted them to remember him as a hero, as a champion of the Republic. The man she loved and looked up to, the man that Padme fell in love with, the man that Obi-Wan had as a brother, and the man that gave hope to the galaxy. The twins were saddened by this, but at the same time they understood why Ahsoka didn't tell them. Their idea of Anakin was the holocron, not the masked man. Their feeling of their father was the good man who fought to save people, not oppress them. Luke and Leia very much so understood that what Ahsoka did for them was out of love, because Ahsoka didn't believe Vader was alive until he showed up in the city, looking for Shaak Ti. The children asked where they were going. Ahsoka would tell them that they were going to Lothal. There was an ancient Jedi Temple on the planet, and she was going to use it to help her in teaching the children. The children were a little upset that they were being displaced by their father, but there was also something else. They told Ahsoka that they felt something within their father. It wasn't just pure evil. While he had no problem executing people and making people across the galaxy suffer, there was something within him. There was still good within Darth Vader. Of course, Ahsoka was corrupted by fear in the moment, but it was true. There was a hint of something else, and the fact that the children of Skywalker picked up on it was even more incredible. Their bond with the Force was enticing, and even more so, their bond to their father was incredible. They were able to gather so much information in just a short encounter. When the ship finally landed on Lothal, they encountered Auntie T and Uncle Kenobi. The kids ran down the ramp to give them hugs, and then explore the new planet. It was a bit different than Shili. One notable difference were the large cylinder rocks in the ground. Ahsoka walked down the ramp slowly as R2 followed her out of the ship. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan knew something had happened. Once the kids ran away, Ahsoka explained everything that had just happened to her. Obi-Wan himself couldn't believe it. He hadn't encountered Vader or even heard about him while he was out with Captain Rex, who now had a band of brothers together, Gregor and Wolf. They served, but not often. While Obi-Wan had saved dozens of Jedi and convinced them to stay away from the Empire, the most notable was a little Wookiee named Gungi, which he saved from an Imperial movement on Kashyyyk. Kenobi and Shaak Ti told Ahsoka that they'd spend more time with her and with the children. It was more apparent that they were needed here rather than elsewhere in the galaxy. And while they wanted to bring Yoda back, he had a very biased appeal to not wanting to leave Dagobah. In his exile, he was learning about his failures and what they meant to him and to the galaxy. He struggled with it. He saw the peak of the Jedi, and he was a part of its failure. Maybe even the architect of it. Palpatine was hundreds of years younger, and he undid something Yoda had known for more than 800 years. The twins went gallivanting around exploring their new home. It was far away from the capital city, and it was intended to be as such. Ahsoka didn't want to risk the children running into their father again. She needed to teach them more about the Force and guide them down the path they were already on. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti would help Ahsoka build her new shelter. It was a bit larger than the one on Shili. It was built into the side of a mountain, but it functioned. There was a room for every Jedi. Luke and Leia had their own separate rooms. There was room for everyone to train and meditate, and of course being located on the side of a mountain, it overlooked the free space of the fields of Lothal. Leia and Luke loved this location dearly, though it would be here that they would first encounter a Morai owl, the mystical being that had some sort of connection to the daughter of Mortis. One of the three ones, father, daughter, son, each representing a different path in the Force. The Morai had been following Ahsoka around since she left the temple, a sign of the pure of heart and living Force that existed within Ahsoka. It was a guide, making sure that she was on the right path, and now that path was given to the children of Skywalker. The remnants of the daughter knew who they were, and knew of the journey that they would partake in to do what it was that no one else in the galaxy could do. Their training would continue, and it would develop greatly on Lothal. Though one day, Obi-Wan would discover a young boy. This boy was exactly one day older than the twins. It may have been a coincidence, but this boy was special. He was powerful with the Force, not like Luke or Leia, but there was a uniqueness to his power. Of course, the Empire had been set out to take children of the Force. Obi-Wan knew he couldn't let this boy become a vessel of evil in the galaxy. Obi-Wan, this one day, brought a boy named Ezra Bridger back to the camp where he would be introduced to Luke, Leia, Shaak Ti, and Ahsoka. A small family that was extremely welcoming to the new boy that lost everyone. Ezra was living alone at this point, but he was not without his wits and his own capabilities. Ezra may have not known the Force yet, but with a teacher he could be taught to become a great wielder, like Luke and Leia. While the twins were excited to have another kid around, Shaak Ti and Ahsoka were interested in who would train the boy. While it was possible for Shaak Ti or even Ahsoka to take on the training, Obi-Wan proposed that they take the boy to Master Yoda. Obi-Wan had the right mindset, but would Ezra thrive with Grandmaster Yoda? It was up to him if he wanted to go to Dagobah. The child hadn't been off-world ever before, so of course it might be a bit of a change of scenery, going from fields a large to a swamp a dreary. Though Obi-Wan made it clear that Ezra needed to spend time with this family that was being built. While Kenobi and Shaak Ti had their ties to the Jedi Code after being a part of it for so long, in the 12 years since the Temple fell, they refrained themselves from the Code, especially because it helped them save lives and garner new connections to help others. Ezra found family with the Skywalkers, Tano, Ti, and Kenobi. With the Empire light years away from Lothal, the planet was a safe haven. As the bond in this new family grew, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and Shaak Ti decided that it was time to take the children of Skywalker and Bridger to the old Jedi Temple on the planet. It was long abandoned, but as the Jedi approached it, Ahsoka looked at Luke and Leia and told them that they had to enter this thing alone. Ezra was a little upset that he was being left behind, but Kenobi explained to him that only two were supposed to enter at the same time. It was meant to be a bond between master and apprentice, but the bond between Luke and Leia allowed them to reveal the entrance. Ezra understood, but he wanted to know if he could go in. Obi-Wan, taking Ezra under his wing, told him that he would accompany him into the temple when Luke and Leia finished their journey. Luke and Leia stepped before the massive mound. It looked like any other across the planet, but they trusted Ahsoka and the other masters as they reached their hands forward, trusting themselves and the Force surrounding them. The Jedi all watched as Luke and Leia lifted the massive structure from out of the ground. They saw a small hole, and they continued focusing their energy and their power. The entire structure was lifted from the ground. They looked at each other and smiled as they ran inside the revealed entrance. They entered a room, and without knowledge of what this journey would do to them, they sat down and meditated. They trusted the Force more than their father ever did. But instead of just one of them having a unique vision, they each individually had their own combined vision. When the darkness that surrounded them shot to light with crimson bleeding red smoke and that breathing. Yes, they heard it too. They heard it on Shili, and sometimes in their dreams. They looked around, and then both of them locked eyes, with darkness before them. A voice rang out, deep, vile, evil. It wasn't Anakin, it was Vader. And now they understood why Ahsoka separated each from one another. Vader was nothing like Anakin. Even in this short moment, they could tell how vile and evil he was. But at the same time, when Luke reached for his blade, Leia reached out. Luke held his hand over his blade. He didn't want his sister getting hurt. Luke was just like Anakin, quick to react by grabbing his lightsaber. But Leia, well, she was like her mother. She reacted quickly with wit and concern. She stepped forward while using the Force. Vader ignited his lightsaber, but Leia did not shy away. She kept walking with her arm outstretched as she looked at Vader. Vader's lightsaber began to fiddle from his hand. As he brought the lightsaber into both of his hands to hold onto it, Leia looked at her father. She was fierce, and she was just like her mother. Vader held onto the blade with all of his strength, but even all of the strength of Darth Vader wasn't enough to keep Leia from stealing his lightsaber with the Force. She pulled the lightsaber from his metallic hands into her own. She held the blade as it cascaded the bleeding souls of hundreds of Jedi across her face. She then sheathed it, looking at her father. She then spoke as he tried to take it back, telling him that he would never amount to the man that Anakin Skywalker once was if he kept hiding behind that mask that he punished himself with. Vader stepped back as she sent a wave of the Force cutting through his face piece and shattering the helmet without even leaving a mark on his face. She looked at him, the real him. Leia was in the moment as she stared down Lord Vader, only to see a frightened man who had lost everything and covered it up with fear, angst, pain, and suffering. Vader fell to his knees. Luke stepped beside his sister as they both collectively used the power of the Force, shattering everything, every ounce of armor, and covering them with the garments of a Jedi. Anakin, with his metallic limbs, covered by Jedi robes, kneeled before them. Luke and Leia looked at their father, their real father. There was coarse brown hair running down his head and onto his shoulders, but he couldn't bear to look at them. Vader was no more. This man was Anakin Skywalker. Luke walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Leia did the same on the other shoulder. They examined him, looking at the scar that draped over his right eye and how blue both of his eyes were. Luke and Leia smiled as they hugged their father for the first time, as he turned to dust in their arms. Luke and Leia's vision ended as they opened their eyes and they both were holding one another. Their vision was powerful, but not as powerful as they were. They were a bond unlike any other the galaxy had ever seen, and having grown up together, they were able to achieve a bond that not even the dark side could break. They let go of each other, each with a single tear falling from their left eyes, as they realized that their father could be saved. Even more so, Vader was just a cover. Anakin Skywalker was still in there, but there was something else. There was darkness from behind Anakin. Why would he have turned to dust otherwise? Maybe he was meant to die, but it seemed as if there was something more, something darker lurking behind him. Luke and Leia found a cave. As they walked through it, they encountered a little green creature who had a cane. Ahsoka always described Yoda like this, but were they really looking at the former Jedi Grand Master? He spoke a riddle to them. They didn't understand what it meant, but Yoda expressed that when the time came, they would know what it was, and what the right decision was to make. It would save someone's life. They nodded, and when they looked back up, he was gone. The two twins left the temple as they confronted the others. They all looked at them with curiosity. They expressed their interactions with Anakin Skywalker and with Master Yoda. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were a bit skeptical while Shaak Ti walked over and told them to meditate on everything that they had just learned. Their bond was so tight that if they focused on it in meditation together, they would have all the answers to the questions they had. Obi-Wan looked down at Ezra and nodded gently. Ezra knew it was their turn to enter the Jedi Temple. As Luke and Leia made their way into a field near Ahsoka and Shaak Ti to meditate, they began digging deeply into the Force and finding out secrets of why the Force was leading them down this path. Then they heard a weird noise, not jolting them from their concentration as they kept their eyes closed, though standing right in front of them was a Morai owl. It was sitting silently, watching over the children. Obi-Wan and Ezra entered the inside of the temple. They both each had their own respective visions. Obi-Wan encountered Anakin alone. Though this wasn't Vader, it was really Anakin. Obi-Wan saw not just Anakin, but he also saw the Chancellor standing behind him. Obi-Wan tried to speak, but he couldn't. He could only listen. Vader hated Obi-Wan, but Anakin loved him. Anakin told Obi-Wan that he needed help. He needed his children. Obi-Wan listened, and then he watched as Palpatine consumed Anakin with the Force cloud. And from the cloud came Darth Vader, telling Obi-Wan that this was his creation. Palpatine became Sidious as he cackled in the background, and Vader's lightsaber swung through Kenobi as he flew through the vision, landing on the ground heavily, breathing as hard as he could. Ezra was nowhere to be seen. He was in his own vision. He was running. Walls were crashing down behind him. In the tunnels, he heard echoes of his parents' voice. He knew he needed to get to them to save them, but he didn't know where they were. He was looking for the light, and he found it. But there was a younger man in front of him. It looked like a politician. He introduced himself as Chancellor Palpatine, smiling at Ezra. Through a small window, the young Ezra could see his family. His parents were in front of him and alive. He looked at them with worry on his face. Then Palpatine smiled wickedly as he looked down at Ezra. He could feel Ezra's indecision. He was being taught, but he wasn't fully within the light. Ezra looked at Palpatine. He knew this was all wrong. He looked at his parents, testing his maturity. He knew he had to let them go. It wouldn't be easy, but they would be alright, wherever they may be. Ezra closed his eyes and pulled his arms together as he pushed out with all of his might, and everything around him crumbled. The nice-looking old man turned into the vilified Dark Lord of the Sith, crying out in fierce anger as everything toppled down on top of him. Ezra ran out of the room as it crumbled behind him, as he found himself lying next to Obi-Wan, who gathered himself to his feet. Obi-Wan and Ezra left, though they didn't see Master Yoda. But as they came out, Ahsoka and Shaak Ti had already gone in. But Luke and Leia were gone. Obi-Wan was a bit worried for them, but when he saw a Morai owl, he knew everything was alright. He looked at Ezra, who looked out into the distant fields, with tears floating down his cheeks. Obi-Wan went over to him and kneeled before him, asking about everything that happened in his vision. Obi-Wan and Ezra shared a moment of bonding, defining that the two of them should become master and apprentice. Ezra talked about memories of his parents before they went missing. He talked about loving them and missing them when they were gone. Obi-Wan expressed that he too remembered his parents, and even a brother. But those were all pieces of the past. He expressed that it was alright to have those memories, and that it was alright to remember them, but as they moved forward in time, let it guide them into betterment. Ezra understood this well as he wiped away tears and wrapped his arms around Obi-Wan, who took him in. Inside of the Jedi Temple, Ahsoka and Shaak Ti began their steps towards meditation. Shaak Ti saw into her own meditation and her own journey as she felt the Force move around her, seeing the galaxy revolve before her eyes. She looked at it, and then she felt the calling to be a guide for people across the galaxy. She then saw people who cry on other planets that look up. She kneeled down and then heard cackling surrounding the galaxy. The planet Ilum flew up into her face as it spun around and exploded in front of her eyes. Ahsoka, on the other hand, watched as a mix of Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader walked towards her. The room looked like the Jedi Temple where he taught her. He was flashing in front of her between Vader and Anakin, where he became a nasty combination of the two. He ignited a lightsaber, and he pumped his arm out as it froze her. Ahsoka couldn't do anything. She looked at him as he pulled his lightsaber up to her throat as she felt the heat of the blade glow across her neck. He swung down without cutting her as he turned around and screamed with all the anger he had within him. The scream broke down the walls of the room as there were the clones from the Siege of Mandalore that surrounded her, with guns raised. Anakin turned around with a tear falling down his eye, and the mask that was a part of his face began to tear apart. Anakin split apart, and his body and Vader fell into two separate directions as clones ran up to him and shot him until each of them dissipated in front of Ahsoka's eyes. Ahsoka then saw Palpatine as he sent lightning at her, and she woke up in the arms of Shaak Ti, who was holding her. Ahsoka looked at Shaak Ti, and Shaak Ti helped her to her feet. Shaak Ti got Ahsoka steady as the two of them took their time as they walked out of the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan was quick to run over and help Ahsoka back. And get her sat down where Ezra was. She was very disturbed by what she encountered inside of the temple. She didn't know what the Force was trying to tell her, but then she asked where the twins were. No one knew. They had vanished, as if they were grabbed up and taken away. Though Luke and Leia were in a small area. They were with the Lothal wolves, and they took them down into an area. The wolves looked forward, and the children, as if they could speak their language, looked at it. Luke and Leia looked forward as they both again outstretched their arms and closed their eyes. The Force rang out from their hands as pieces of dirt, rocks, and boulders lifted up. They moved everything to the sides gently. Luke and Leia didn't know that they had this much power at such a young age, and neither did Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, or Shaak Ti. Luke and Leia opened their eyes as they looked at what they had done, though there was a massive wall in front of them, and that wall had beautiful artwork on it. And then the wolves that brought them here ran towards the wall and jumped into it. The wall began to illuminate, as three large figures became more present than ever before. The man in the middle, with a large white beard, the woman with flowing white hair, and the other man with no hair and red and white marks across his face. They didn't know what it was, but they followed the wolves as they looked at the illuminating wall. They placed their hands on the wall as brother and sister looked at each other. Before they knew it, they were surrounded by narrow paths and nothingness but space. Small portals were etched at the ends of every path, though, from where the twins were, it was all dark except for the one right behind them. The one behind them led them back to their time. Luke and Leia walked forward. They had so much they wanted to see. They had no clue, but they wanted to find out what they could find out. Inside of this world between worlds, they saw things they heard stories of. There was an arena. It sounded like the story Ahsoka used to tell them when they were younger. There was a beautiful young woman, a strong, courageous young man, and Uncle Kenobi with his flowing Jedi mullet. They watched as their innovative mother did what Ahsoka said she did in all the stories. Leia kept walking as Luke watched his father take on a horned beast. Leia found something that caught her attention. Anakin and Padme were dancing in a field of grass, laughing and rolling around on top of each other. Luke ran over and watched their parents enjoy living life for a moment. Then Luke and Leia walked past another portal and saw Obi-Wan on a riverbank over lava as he looked down on their father. The anger, the pure hate, it wasn't Anakin. They watched as he told Obi-Wan not to underestimate his power as he leaped into the air. They watched their father be torn limb from limb by his own ineptitude, his own inability to see that Obi-Wan was just trying to spare him. Luke covered Leia's eyes as he pushed his sister away as he trailed behind her as Anakin burst in flames. They moved on to the next portal. Luke and Leia traveled through this world between worlds for an hour as they continued to trail on and on, seeing past events happen in real time. So much pain, war, death, and unbelievable suffering that happened before their birth. The Clone Wars were tragic. And then Luke and Leia stumbled upon Obi-Wan. He was wearing red armor of sorts, and he was kneeling down. There was a beautiful woman on the other side, but she was floating in the air, kicking her legs, trying to breathe. She was standing next to a horned man with red skin, who was looking at Kenobi. The horned man ignited his weapon, and Leia, on a guttural reaction, reached out with a force and pulled the woman from the room. Kenobi looked up in confusion, and Maul slammed his weapon into the wall. He looked around and cried out in anger before kicking Kenobi in the jaw with his metallic foot, knocking him out. Maul looked around and demanded that they find Satine. On the other side of the portal, Satine opened her eyes and caught her breath. Luke and Leia looked at her with shock. Who was she? The woman sighed, and then she looked up at the two kids and the mysterious world she was in. She asked if she was dead, to which the kids told her she wasn't. She asked then where she was, to which the kids responded telling her that it was some world between worlds. Luke felt cold. Leia asked what the woman's name was, and she said that she was Satine Kryze of Mandalore. Leia's jaw dropped. She jumped with joy, saying that Uncle Kenobi would be so happy to see her. Satine's teeth glimmered as she gently smiled, looking at Leia, with a bit of confusion, and then to the boy who was staring off. Luke looked back at them and told them that they needed to get out of here now. Leia turned around and her back filled with chills. She looked into the devious yellow eyes of a hooded man. Satine leaped to her feet as Luke and Leia took off in the direction that they came. Sidious cackled from behind them, summoning the dark side of the Force into the world between worlds. The kids ran and turned a corner when they saw the arena of Geonosis. Satine giggled when she saw Obi-Wan's mullet before she turned and ran after the children. Leia told her that it was right up ahead when a massive beam of lightning began trailing behind the three of them. Luke pushed Leia and Satine ahead of him as they made their way out of the portal. Luke turned around using all of his Force might to deter the lightning away from Satine and Leia. The lightning was delayed, but then a massive boost of it shot Luke out of the portal, as the portal closed behind him. He slammed into the ground and tumbled away. Obi-Wan, who was on the cliff, saw Luke, but he didn't see Leia or Satine, who were right near the mouth of the portal on the ground. Obi-Wan jumped down as Ahsoka and Shaak Ti ran down the hill. Obi-Wan landed and ran over to Luke, picking him up in his arms, feeling his forehead and hearing his heartbeat. He was alright, he was just knocked out, by using all of his strength to save his sister and Satine. He would be alright, he just needed to rest. Obi-Wan laid him back down gently and looked up at Shaak Ti and Ahsoka, who looked at him as if they had just seen a ghost. While their interactions were limited, both Shaak Ti and Ahsoka knew of Satine, and they both knew how important she was to Obi-Wan. He was still on his knees when he looked at Shaak Ti and Ahsoka when Obi-Wan heard a familiar voice call out his nickname. Only one person had ever used it. Hearing Obi, he turned around and his eyes shot open and his mouth hung open. As Leia stood next to Satine, who was just as amazed to see Obi-Wan. He had aged, and there were gray hairs in his beard and on his head. Obi-Wan jumped from the ground as he ran over to Satine, picking her up in his arms. She was so happy to see him, but she couldn't possibly understand why he was acting like she was just resurrected. Obi-Wan didn't know how or why. He put her down and held her at arm's length as they looked into each other's eyes. Kenobi's memory drew a blank, as if it never had happened. As if she had never died. But for the longest time, it felt like she had died. Luke and Leia accidentally changed the events of the past. Leia didn't even mean to save Satine, it was just a guttural response. They didn't even know they could do it. If they did, they would have saved Anakin from so many different events. Leia turned around, but the world between worlds was closed, and the illuminated lights were dim, not to be seen. Obi-Wan held Satine in his arms, tears in his eyes as he looked at the only woman he had ever loved. She, of course, was thrilled to see him, but she didn't know anything of what had happened. She missed out on about 12 years of history, much of which saw a complete death of her own people and their population. They had a lot to catch Satine back up on, but for now they had to figure out what Luke and Leia had discovered. Part of Ezra was afraid that he could lose his master, but Obi-Wan wouldn't abandon him. Though Obi-Wan was fully prepared to give his heart over to Satine, her death, or whatever it was that happened to her, made him realize that life wasn't entirely worth living by the Jedi Code. The day would pass and the night. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would recognize the ones that were a part of the art outside of the world between worlds. The conclusion is that, just like Anakin, Luke and Leia were special enough for the ones to trust them with true power within the Force. So much could be done and undone within the world between worlds. They had to be very careful with this power that they possessed. Though it was unnerving that Sidious already had his foot in the door when it came to the world between worlds, the group traveled back to their camp and set up a fire as they always did. Kenobi took Satine away from the camp as they sat overlooking the fields of Lothal, explaining the fate of her beloved Mandalore. Nothing could have been changed after the Republic went in after Maul. After the Siege of Mandalore, everything changed, and while Bo-Katan continued to be a maniac, the Mandalorians were shelled by the Empire in the Night of 1,000 Tears. Mandalore crumbled under the might of the Empire. Satine's heart was broken for her people. She learned of all the travesties she missed in the short period she was gone. Obi-Wan made sure she didn't blame herself, though. It wasn't right for her to feel responsible for something she wasn't there for. Obi-Wan also expressed that he believed she were killed in an alternate reality by Maul to get revenge on him. She was saved by Leia, but Obi-Wan still didn't know how. Even more so, there were many other galactic events that Satine needed to be caught back up on. Inside the camp where everyone else was, Ezra expressed his concerns, and Shaak Ti informed him that he would be alright with Kenobi. But she, being the eldest member of the group, told everyone that it was time for her to make a move and make a difference in the galaxy. While Luke, Leia, and Ezra had to finish their training, Shaak Ti expressed that she had a vision of Ilum, and she would be going there temporarily to see why the planet came to her in a vision. Luke and Leia then expressed to the group that there was still good in Vader. While Ahsoka still hadn't figured out what her vision told her, or its very hidden meaning, she wanted to believe that. She of course felt that there was something different inside of Vader, but what if it could only be that the children could be bringing him back from the dark side? Ahsoka knew that the children needed to train harder than ever. It would be now or never. Ezra, being fearful of losing his master, be reassured when Kenobi told them that they would go to Dagobah for a month and then return to finish his training here on Lothal. While leaving Satine behind would be hard, she tried her best to catch up on everything since the fall of the Republic, so that she could return to the political atmosphere and maybe guide Lothal against the Empire. The next 4 years would be tense. While Luke and Leia grew into extraordinary powers, the Empire found itself moving into Lothal's area. While on the other hand, Satine found herself some use, becoming the governor of Lothal and helping the people of the planet, whilst keeping the Empire away from the planet. There was no need for Imperial garrisons, and while she made it extremely clear that the planet was operating in full cohesion with Imperial law, she kept rebels and Jedi alike safe from the Empire. Meanwhile, Ezra grew in his own power. He was a fierce young Jedi, and while the Jedi found themselves in a better position with refugees set up across the galaxy and the Outer Rim in the early post-Order 66 years, the Empire was unnervingly close to the Jedi, and finding them in hiding. Ezra, after the month journey to Dagobah with Kenobi, would return to Dagobah by himself from time to time to train with Yoda alone. Kenobi and Satine also reignited their infatuation for one another and even broke the Jedi Code by becoming open lovers for one another. While Kenobi and her couldn't be public about it because of the Empire, their relationship was no secret to anyone from home camp. Shaak Ti had gone to Ilum and disrupted a mining facility several times, stopping the Empire from mining the kyber crystals on the planet. She also escaped a narrow interaction with Lord Vader, who was sent there to kill her. While Ahsoka had toiled over her vision from the temple for a couple months, she never let it get away from her training of Luke and Leia. The twins were more powerful than Vader was during Operation Nightfall. There was nothing that could stop these twins. They were the most powerful duelists since Revan, and they were even more powerful in the Force than their father. Individually, not as much, but combined they were a force to be reckoned with. Luke and Leia were never separated, they were always together, and that's frankly how they liked it. Their bond was a sort of dyad in the Force, a bond that could only be created by two twins in the Force, and while these twins never had to be biological, coincidentally Luke and Leia were biological twins, which only strengthened their relationship as brother and sister. In terms of lightsaber combat, they grew exponentially. The only person that could match their skill was one another. Luke would beat Leia sometimes, and the inverse would happen the rest. Most of the time, though, they would result in a draw. They had been dueling with each other for 6 years and growing an unattainable bond with one another. While there was also one other larger thing changing in the Outer Rim, and around Lothal. There were outlets of rebels rallying. Their goal was to beat back the Empire and destroy the Empire for what it had become. While the Empire was powerful, these rebels were focused, determined, and they were growing. The rebellion's message spread throughout the Outer Rim and was working its way through the Mid-Rim too. With Jedi like Shaak Ti, Kanan Jarrus, and even Ahsoka Tano at times, the Jedi were rallying people of the galaxy against the evil Empire. Though everything on the peaceful planet Lothal would change when Star Destroyers entered above, ordering Governor Satine to issue out curfews and ordering a garrison to the surface. While Satine disagreed with the mandate to have troops forced into the capital Lothal, and even more so to have the Empire breathe down the necks of her citizens, a threat by the Grand Inquisitor changed not just her position, but the face of the galaxy. Satine and her office would encounter the Grand Inquisitor, and finally healed Fifth Brother. They demanded that the Imperial troops be allowed to control the streets of Lothal. Satine denied these requests, saying that the city and the planet were abiding by the laws of the Empire. There was no reason for the Empire to be here, because there were no illegalities. Obviously, when the Grand Inquisitor ignited his lightsaber, Obi-Wan, who was hiding in the room, jumped into action. He and Satine were having a lunch date when the Inquisitors arrived. If the rebellion could secure victory out here on Lothal, it could prove to be a rallying cry for the people of the rebellion. Kenobi's lightsaber ignited, and Satine jumped up as she ran behind Obi-Wan. he faced down the Inquisitors, who were no match for him. While the Grand Inquisitor was the best of the Inquisitorius, the Inquisitors themselves had not much of a reputation. They would take on former Padawans and almost easily win. They weren't really a competition, especially against a Jedi Master who had spent the last 16 years practicing his technique and only becoming better. The fifth brother moved in for an attack, deflected by the Master of Defense, as the Grand Inquisitor moved in to take on Kenobi. Obi-Wan was quick on his feet as he moved from the fifth brother to the Grand Inquisitor with intense speeds. The Grand Inquisitor didn't expect it, as he was thrown from his feet onto Satine's desk, squashing their food. The fifth brother moved in again. Obi-Wan changed forms as he took an offensive position, one he trained Luke and Leia with. He pushed the fifth brother over a chair, knocking him on his back, and the Grand Inquisitor got up and swung at Kenobi. He used an Anakin move as he twisted his blade around his back, blocking the attack and spinning to cut the Grand Inquisitor into two pieces. As the fifth brother rose, Kenobi drove his blade back into the stomach of the fifth brother. Obi-Wan made a snarky remark to Satine about getting her lunch another time. She rolled her eyes as he guided her out of her office. It would be best if she stayed away from her office for a while. With two Inquisitors dead, one being the Grand Inquisitor, it wouldn't be long before Vader was dispatched to Lothal. Obi-Wan got Satine to a speeder and got her to an underground passageway that the rebels and Jedi had been using to disrupt the Imperials that made their way onto the surface without Satine's approval. Because Satine's rule was now seen as an image of hope in the galaxy, she was now a target of the Empire. While she didn't hold the same leverage as Mon Mothma or Bail Organa, who were both senators in the Imperial Senate, she definitely had the ability to make an impact with her voice. That was always the case for her. When Obi-Wan and Satine got back to camp, they informed Ahsoka, Luke, and Leia about what had just happened. Ezra was currently off-world with some of his new friends that he just made, by circumstance. He was working with the Ghost Squadron to rally people on Bothawai. It wouldn't be more than a week before the Empire cracked down on Lothal, and Lord Vader was sent to kill the Jedi and the Governor alike. Vader's presence was a complete disturbance within the Force. Kenobi told Ahsoka that she should take the children to face Vader. Based on the visions they had 4 years ago, they would likely be best to face him. Obi-Wan would only anger Vader by showing up, and that wouldn't help anything moving forward. It would only make things worse. Kenobi told Luke and Leia to trust in the Force as he looked at them. Vader wasn't Anakin, and they knew that, but he would be looking for revenge, not knowing that the two of them existed, and it would confuse him. He might get mad, or he might become interested, but don't expect immediate change. Anakin never did that, so don't expect Vader to. He could very well be very violent towards the situation. Luke and Leia understood as they gave Uncle Kenobi a hug before they left. They were young adults now, and they were ready. They got to the city in a short period of time, and when they arrived, they made it ever so apparent that they were looking for Darth Vader. Luke and Leia dispatched the stormtroopers by throwing them aside, ensuring not to kill them. Luke, Leia, and Ahsoka were all beacons of peace. Back inside the camp, Obi-Wan sat on the floor of his room, while Satine slept in their bed. While Satine did have her own governor's home, she always preferred to be with Kenobi. Much like Padme, she had a decoy. This decoy would always sleep in the governor's home. That was their only job. While Kenobi sat on the floor, he heard a voice of his former master. It had been so long. Qui-Gon made it apparent to Obi-Wan that seeing Skywalker would never be the same for him, reminding him, trust in the Force, let it guide every action and every heart-filled decision. Qui-Gon from beyond the netherworld knew that Kenobi would do what he himself always wanted to do, to enjoy the love of his life without the restrictions of the code, because after all, Qui-Gon too had himself a woman. Ahsoka told Luke and Leia to stick together. By this point, Ahsoka saw the twins as almost equals. They were trained from birth and incredibly talented. They were even more powerful than her at this point. They walked through the streets and there they saw the Inquisitorius. They had all gathered for this moment. They were here to help Vader, because Vader had a suspicion that either Kenobi would be dragged out after watching the population be slaughtered, or that there were more Jedi here. While the latter happened to be true, the Inquisitors jumped into action when they saw Luke in his flowing dark robes and Leia and Ahsoka in flowing white robes. The Inquisitors' lightsabers activated as they ran. Ahsoka stopped, as she knew the twins were ready for this moment. Luke was on her right and Leia was on her left as they walked past their master and looked at the Inquisitors that were running towards them. Without raising their blades or their hands, the Inquisitors started getting sent into one another by the Force. Luke and Leia were incredibly powerful. The Inquisitors got too close to them, and as they did, Leia and Luke ignited their blades. The Inquisitors, who were still standing, clashed with Luke and Leia, but they were no match for the power of the twins. In their first real test of combat, with people trying to actually kill them, Luke and Leia, with their skill, fought back the Inquisitors. The Inquisitors tried their best, but they were slain, or knocked out. They stood no chance against these twins. Then the streets turned silent as Lord Vader came around the corner to see his children, though in his mind they were 2 Jedi and the apprentice. He could feel the familiarity in the Force, and while he knew Shaak Ti was out and about, dodging him left and right, the familiarity in the Force led him to believe that this Togruta was Ahsoka. Vader gave Ahsoka the opportunity to join him almost 6 years beforehand, though it wouldn't be the same this time. Now he was going to kill these Jedi and find Kenobi, when he heard the young woman speak out, saying that she didn't want to fight her father. The boy wearing dark robes then repeated the message. Vader looked at the 2 young Jedi, but he didn't know why they were talking to him like that. He was a bit confused, but he carried on forward, igniting his lightsaber. But Luke and Leia stopped his movement, without even lifting a finger. He didn't know why he couldn't move, and he looked at the Jedi. Then he spoke in his menacing voice, asking who they were. Leia stepped forward with her lightsaber ignited, dangling down beside her, as she said that they were Luke and Leia Skywalker, twins born to Padme Amidala, and children of Anakin Skywalker. Vader looked at them. He was stuck. He didn't know what to do. There was no way that Padme had given birth to 2 children, but even if she did, how or why? Vader had no answers to his questions. Leia force-pulled Vader's weapon as he tightened his grip on it, pulling his second hand to hold onto his lightsaber, as Leia pulled the blade straight from his hand, as more shock confused him. There were few beings in the galaxy that were powerful enough to do that, let alone a child. Vader was defenseless, and stormtroopers began to fire on the Jedi, as Luke, Leia, and Ahsoka stood side by side, deflecting blaster bolts. Stormtroopers fell next to Vader as he watched the Jedi do their thing. All of a sudden, an Inquisitor rose from the rubble where they fell, and Vader with the Force snapped the Inquisitor's neck before he could do anything. Vader was interested in this, and as all of his men died next to him, he looked onto the children. Ahsoka stepped back from the twins as she sheathed her lightsabers. She watched as Vader walked forward. Leia spoke up, asking for her father to come back to the light. Then Luke barraged him, saying that they wanted the real Anakin Skywalker. They wanted their father to return. Vader crossed his arms as he turned around and looked away from them. They continued telling him that they knew Anakin Skywalker was a good man. He saved people, he brought hope, he sowed love into the galaxy. Vader was beginning to get angry. He was trying to cover himself, his vulnerable self, that was Anakin Skywalker. He couldn't give in, not even for his kids, because he knew he killed their mother. He failed Padme, and in his mind, only deserved to suffer for his inability to see through the lies of the Sith. Vader's helmet looked down towards the ground below him as he looked at the dead men. He then heard something that perked his head up. He heard the voice of Anakin Skywalker, and it was his basic lightsaber instruction holocron that he gave to Ahsoka. Luke then continued telling him that he taught them everything of the Force and how to use a lightsaber. Of course, Ahsoka helped them, but the help of Anakin's instructional holocrons only helped them progress further in their training. Vader uncrossed his arms and turned around looking at his younger self, when Anakin Skywalker was entirely a man, not just a machine of slavery. Vader was miserable, but it scared him, going back into the light. He had done so much wrong in the galaxy, but his children were right in front of him. Then he thought, what if he could turn? He was interrupted by Leia speaking out, telling him that they would not turn to the dark side. Their lightsabers were pure as Anakin used to be. Their blades had the heart of Padme and the courage of Anakin. Vader tried to explain that the name Anakin Skywalker was dead to him. He wasn't Anakin anymore. He continued telling them that he only thinks about revenge and slaughtering the innocents of the galaxy in conquest for more power. Luke spoke up, telling Anakin that he no longer needed that power. With his family at his side, he could finally be happy. There was a way to save Padme. Vader stepped forward. That caught his attention. Luke smiled. And then he said that they saved Satine from the world beyond worlds. It was possible to save Padme without killing either Luke or Leia. Because of course if Padme was saved before Luke and Leia were born, it could possibly kill them, in which they'd have to be reborn, which, with Vader's, disability, would be a hard chance for them to be reborn. Vader thought he had been evil for almost 2 decades. It was a way of life, and most of it was his dehumanization of himself. He never gave himself a break, he only tortured himself for everything he had done. Vader looked at his children. Luke and Leia put away their shimmering lightsabers, and Leia walked forward and placed Vader's lightsaber on the floor. Luke and Leia put their hands on their father and then wrapped their arms around his hulking suit. He looked at Ahsoka, and then he looked down at his children. He didn't feel cold, he felt warm. His pain felt like it was put to sleep. His suffering felt like it was cured. Sure, he was still in the suit of Vader, but for the first time since Obi-Wan left for Utapau, he felt like Anakin Skywalker again. Then, with all the pain and memories, they rushed back into his head. With the dark side, they could be blocked away, but with the light, he had to accept what had been done to the Jedi and to the people of the galaxy. Vader was still afraid of the Emperor. There were so many thoughts running through his mind. He wanted to push his kids off, but he also wanted to embrace something so new to him. They weren't just Jedi, they were something more, and even more than that, they were his children. Vader couldn't understand that they wanted him just to be him. He thought he had vanquished all the goodness in his heart, the traumatic memories of what he had done to others. How could he live with it? Luke and Leia still kept their arms around their father. There was nothing he can do. He couldn't run away from it, and he couldn't deny it. He had to live with it. He had to live with the fact that no matter the harm he caused the galaxy, he had two children that adored him. Not Vader, Anakin. And then, without a moment of hesitation, a voice came to him. The voice sounded familiar. The voice spoke in patterns to the late Qui-Gon. It was his former, meant-to-be master, Qui-Gon, who spoke into his ears, telling him that he was the chosen one, meant to bring balance to the Force. His children would help him do that. Vader wanted to hear from Master Qui-Gon more, but the truth was that he heard that voice several times since becoming Darth Vader. He first heard it when he slaughtered the Tusken Raiders on Tatooine after his mother's death. He heard it as he marched to the temple, and he heard it before entering the council chambers, where all the younglings were. He heard it after he slaughtered the separatist leaders on Mustafar. Every so often inside of his meditation chamber, he heard the voice. Every time he heard it, though, he passed it off like it were the wind. He never treated it like it was actually there. He never accepted that someone would actually try to help him. No one but Qui-Gon ever tried. Vader then thought about one more thing. If he joined his children, he'd have to forgive Obi-Wan. Could he do that? Leia then spoke, and she told her father, because she could see into his mind, that Uncle Kenobi never wanted to hurt him. He was just doing his mandate as a Jedi. He loved Anakin, and he still does love Anakin Skywalker. Vader couldn't handle this. It was all wrong. How could any of this be happening right now? It was unbearable, but then it became bearable. As he wrapped his arms around his children, feeling the warmth of the Force and letting go of the cold, icy evil he lived in for so long, he embraced this moment when his heart let go of the hate within and allowed him to become Anakin Skywalker once again. When his kids finally released him, they looked at each other with the largest smiles in the galaxy. Vader looked down with his mask still on. He was still the scary-looking vile creature he was before, but Luke and Leia saw him as Anakin Skywalker. Vader didn't know what to do now, but Luke and Leia told him that it was time for them to cement the light in the galaxy. He didn't know what this meant, but then he understood when they said it was time for the Chosen One to bring balance to the Force. He needed to help them kill his master. It wouldn't be easy, but it could be done. Vader pulled his lightsaber and placed it on his belt as he looked at Leia, Luke, and eventually at Ahsoka, who still had tears in her eyes after watching the children she helped raise bring their father back from the darkness. Vader expressed that it would be hard to get to the Emperor and get him alone. And then Leia smiled, telling him that they already knew how to. But they needed Anakin to open the world between worlds. They of course didn't really need him to do it, but it was a test to remind him of the balance in the Force when someone used powers of the light and the dark. It wouldn't be long before the four of them got to the location of the portal, and then Anakin walked up to the wall and recognized the ones. It had been so long since he had seen them, or even thought about them. He couldn't believe it had been that long since he interacted with them. He looked at the wall and then placed his hand on the father, realizing that he had failed his mandate as the Chosen One to protect the galaxy and the people in it. The wolves began to twist on the wall as Anakin used the Force to pump energy into the massive wall as he focused all of his energy on bringing it to life. Luke, Leia, and Ahsoka watched with great interest as the portals opened and sucked Vader in. Leia and Luke tried to follow him, but it closed. This was a mission for him, and him alone. Ahsoka put her hands on the twins as they tried to get into the portal, and then told them to trust in the Force. Their vision became truth, and now they had the trust that the Force would guide Anakin to right the wrongs of his past. Anakin looked around. His breathing still followed him as he continued walking down the path that was in front of him when he first entered. Vader looked around, looking when he heard familiar voices. "This lightsaber is your life. I believe he is the chosen one." It went on, and then he heard a voice of Padme. His wandering stopped as he looked over and saw her and Anakin rolling in a field on Naboo. He wanted to get there, but then he heard something else. He heard someone screaming, and then, as fast as he could, he walked over there, where the sounds came from. It was Mace Windu, who was being electrocuted because Anakin cut his arm off. When he got shot out into the city of Coruscant, Vader used the Force to pull him in. Windu crashed into Vader as he rolled off. His skin burned and his robes inflamed from the electrocution he took. Anakin put the fires out as he looked down at the former master of the Order. Windu jolted his eyes open and then looked at Vader. While Windu was never afraid, the sight would startle anyone. Vader asked who he was. Anakin explained everything that had happened to him. Windu didn't have his lightsaber, so he couldn't think with it. Instead, he asked how they got there. Anakin explained more, and even more about the Ones and what Yoda was interacting with at the end of the Clone Wars called the Wills. Windu didn't understand everything, and then something distracted him. Both Anakin and Windu felt it, as the world between worlds began to get cold. Windu looked over Vader's shoulder, and then saw two glaring yellow eyes. Windu told Skywalker to give him his lightsaber. As he pulled it with the Force, Windu took Vader's blade and ran at Sidious. Mace had a grape to pick, and he wasn't going to let Sidious get away with it this time. Palpatine was an old man, but he still had the power of the Force as his ally, as he shot a massive wave of Force lightning at Windu. Mace kept running towards the lightning until he leaped into the air, jumping over it. The lightning toppled over towards Anakin, who turned around and got leveled as he was shot with Force lightning continuously, falling to the ground and suffering in pain with it. Windu then landed inside of the portal, killing Sidious with one swift strike across the chest. Before Windu could get back and see what happened to Anakin, the portal closed on his side. With Palpatine dead, there was no way for him to access the world between worlds. He didn't know how. Though, Mace was on a superstructure, full of Imperial stormtroopers. Windu didn't know much, but he did know that he had to be cautious. Based on the little that Anakin told him, this was the Empire, and they were now the enemy of the Jedi. Mace realized that, after a while, that he was on a massive space station with a large super laser, though it was still under construction. He thought he should blow it up, considering that he overheard the comm chatter saying that there was a lot of high-ranking Imperial officers here to see the Emperor. Inside of the world between worlds, Vader lay as his suit was crippled. He could hardly move and his life support was almost offline, but he was alive. The Force kept him alive though. And then he heard a voice. It was his wife. Vader twisted his body as much as he could. She was so far away but he could see her, laying on a medical bay table. She was talking to Obi-Wan about Anakin. She'd just given birth. Maybe she could be saved if Anakin reached out with all of his might, dragging the metallic hand out and reaching for Padme. She was so close to dying of a broken heart, but with all of Anakin's might, he pulled her off the medical bay table and pulled her into the world between worlds as he called out her name. Her heart may be broken, but she can manage to drag her head up and over to see that she wasn't in the medical bay anymore. Her strength was weak, but she saw Vader. Anakin removed his helmet and crawled over. He told her that he was Anakin. She looked at him, unable to believe what happened to him. Vader got inches away from... Anakin woke up inside of a Bacta tank. He was floating in there with a respirator. His skin could be seen healing more than ever before. He was confused, looking around the room, thinking he was back as Vader. And then Luke placed his hand on the glass, smiling at his father. Anakin was confused, breathing rapidly, and then he looked over Luke's shoulder to see Padme. She was standing, and she was okay. She looked at Anakin with a pleasant smile on her face. Anakin had been in a coma for about a month. Right as he got to Padme in the world between worlds, he passed out. The rebellious twins told Ahsoka that they weren't going in there for Sidious, but for Anakin. They knew he needed them, and he did. They got to Padme and Anakin just in time. Padme made a quick recovery, and she was filled in on everything. A lot had happened since Anakin passed out. But spending all of his time in a Bacta tank healed his body more than before. Vader punished himself, but having dedicated time inside of a Bacta tank truly healed his body. But there was a lot that had happened. The Emperor was reported dead inside of the massive superstructure. That blew up not long after the Emperor was reported dead by Grand Admiral Thrawn. Tarkin and Thrawn assumed roles at the head of the Imperial military and Imperial Senate, but it didn't matter, because the entire structure crumbled, exploding from the inside out. Anakin knew it must have been Windu that did it, but he also knew that Windu must have sacrificed himself for the galaxy. The rebellion grew, but it was still a small force compared to the Empire itself. But with the entire Imperial structure falling apart, the Imperial Senate decided to reform the Empire into a republic. The people of the galaxy were tired of tyranny, and they took the galaxy back into their own hands. While the Imperial forces loomed large over the galaxy, people knew that they could stand up to such a power, with Obi-Wan, Ezra, Kanan, Ahsoka, and Shaak Ti out in the galaxy rallying the people, and the rebellion took a foothold in the mid-rim. There was little to nothing that the Empire could do when hope began to fill the minds of every citizen within the Empire. Luke and Leia would tell Anakin to spend some time inside of the Bacta tank. They were planning to surprise him. While those few more weeks would pass, Kenobi would have a chance to visit Anakin. There was a tense atmosphere when Obi-Wan came to visit Anakin, but Obi-Wan apologized for everything. Even though he was a teacher and the one who defiled Anakin on Mustafar, it didn't mean that everything was his fault, but Kenobi always took it that way. He apologized to Anakin for everything, and while Anakin still was recovering from his trip down the dark path, he saw his family behind Obi-Wan. Knowing how important Obi-Wan was to the lives of his children, and being there for both Padme and the twins when he couldn't be, was a true expression of who Kenobi was. When it came time for Anakin to come out of the Bacta tank, he had a thin layer of hair on his head, and his skin looked human again. The new suit Anakin had was constructed by Luke, Leia, Padme, and Obi-Wan. The suit wasn't heavy, it fit him nicely, and he was able to walk without being in pain. The legs were shiny, covered by Jedi boots. The rest were robes that looked like a former Jedi's robes. Though there was something else he noticed after being placed into his new suit. He realized that he could breathe like a man again, because he in fact was a man again. But that didn't matter, because he wrapped his arms around Padme, finally. Before she died, she knew there was still good in him, and while she had time to recover, after learning about everything he had done, he wasn't evil anymore. He was Anakin. Even more ironic, though, is that now that Anakin had been living in time and Padme was taken out of time, Anakin was now older than her, which didn't necessarily bother her. But because the Jedi Code was no more, the two of them would be able to live happily and openly. It wouldn't take long for the Imperial military to be wiped off the face of the galaxy. When they were, the Republic took advantage of the power gap in the galaxy and restored order. The Jedi, on the other hand, would return from exile, hundreds of members who survived ready to join. Luke and Leia on their new journey with a new order. Yoda, who was still alive, would join them, returning from exile to help the Skywalkers restore the Jedi Order. Anakin and Padme, on the other hand, would return to Naboo and settle down. And while Satine was governor of Lothal, she and Kenobi would finally be able to find peace in life with one another away from the carnage of destruction. Ahsoka and Shaak Ti would accompany Luke and Leia, but they would split off and come back every so often. Ahsoka and Shaak Ti wanted to be more active in the galaxy, especially while the Jedi Order found itself rebuilding out on the world of Tatooine. While this new era of Jedi would be completely different than the previous one, they would have a lot of similar moral codes. Though Luke and Leia, seeing Obi-Wan and Anakin find love in Satine and Padme, decided that the Jedi should be allowed to have attachments. Yoda, who was still in his old ways, had trouble with this, but later accepted the change to the Jedi Code. The hundreds of members would return, and they would learn from Luke and Leia, and eventually Ezra, who returned after helping Ghost Squadron defeat Imperial pockets of insurgents. The Jedi would become more balanced, a love of the light and passion for peace, but even more so an understanding of how the Force worked. It would take the rest of the following decade for the Jedi to extinguish the lack of balance, when Luke, Leia, and Anakin went to face down the last evil presence in the galaxy known as Snoke. Anakin finally completed the prophecy that Qui-Gon knew he would complete, bringing balance to the Force and peace to the galaxy, once and for all. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our epic story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jay Hoffman, and WarPigman308 for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this so we can see what if Vader survived Return of the Jedi. If you want to see a what if, let me know down below. I do read all your comments, but I don't do crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to be a part of the community and help me in other ways. And one other thing, if you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, the next lightsaber giveaway is on July 4th. You go down below, you click on a link for a doc, you go to that link and you write your handy dandy name, and you listen to the rules. Simple as it goes. Lightsaber will be given away on July 4th. Anyways, let's talk about our story today. Okay, I didn't expect it to be this long. I really didn't. I just started writing and it started going, and it didn't. I'm very happy with the story. It gives me kind of the same vibes as the What If Vader Raised Luke story. Very long, very intense story with a lot going on in it. But at a certain point, I had to realize that in the beginning, it was all set up from the beginning. You know, Ahsoka couldn't just do this alone, and I don't think Obi-Wan would allow himself to let Ahsoka do this alone. Obviously, I think Obi-Wan not being stuck on Tatooine would make him less of a coward, as it were. As we've seen in the Kenobi show, without any spoilers, he's acting like he lived in a desert for 10 years. This is not that Obi-Wan. This Obi-Wan didn't live in a desert for 10 years. He didn't live hiding and avoiding this guy named Owen who didn't want him around. He didn't cower from the farmer. He was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he stayed Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he built a bond with Rex, and I think that bond is really interesting. I think some more time could have been dedicated to that bond, but I didn't really want to take away from the story around Ahsoka and Leia. I mean, this story could have easily been 3-4 hours long, but that's just too long for a video, honestly. But I wanted to give the highlights, the important parts of the story, and those important parts was Obi-Wan stayed Obi-Wan because he worked with Captain Rex. He actually worked with the Bad Batch at one point, and I think that would be really interesting as Obi-Wan stays out there. I think it was fun bringing back Shaak Ti and having other cameos throughout the story. And honestly, the difference was this had a much different ending. The ending was completely different, and it never had the world between worlds in it. And then I got to Lothal, and I was like, wait, what if I did something interesting here? And it came from the inspiration of them using this ancient Jedi Temple and finding this world between worlds. And I think the story was able to grow quite beautifully from what I originally had planned. I had people talk to me about having inspiration for this, and I'll be honest, I'm going to say this right here and right now. I never watched Star Wars Elseworlds videos. I know of him, and I respect him for the content he makes, but I don't watch his videos. I don't watch any other Star Wars creators because I don't want to be inspired by anybody else. All the work that you see here is completely from my mind, and I want you guys to know that. Because I'm sure there's people that'll say, oh, Star Wars Elseworlds did this already. Kudos to him. But I didn't watch that video, so congratulations, but I didn't watch it. And yeah. But this video was completely inspired from what I thought would happen. And while I liked having Shaak Ti show up here and there, I thought accessing the world between worlds and unleashing that power unveiled a whole new opportunity for Luke, Leia, Anakin, Obi-Wan even, and I didn't intend on bringing Satine back. Satine was never in any script. I did it on a whim. You know, I was like, wait, what if this happened? You know, what if it was just an accident? And I wanted it to be an accident because Luke and Leia would have never known that they could just pull somebody out of there. I think that would just be an accident where Leia would just be like, no, and then like just jolt in her hand, and she would just pull Satine out of Mandalore and into the world between worlds. And I think it adds a whole new perception of things. Now you have a politician involved in the team. You have a team and a family. I guess you'd say a family, and I think I would call them a family, but you have a family here. And that was the moral of the story, the family that is torn apart by Anakin. And what could have been had he not torn it apart, or had Ahsoka just stepped up and stepped to the plate of being this figure that she knew she could be. She was a very, very strong figure, and I think if she settled into this role, and if she just happened to go to Polis Massa, I think she could have really settled into a role of being the parental figure, not only just a parental figure, but the teacher that Luke and Leia needed. Luke and Leia being trained from birth is completely different, and I know I'm rambling on, but this is a long video, a lot to cover in it, and I think Luke and Leia would have really been the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They weren't as powerful as Anakin, so for example, if Anakin never had any limbs taken off, Anakin would have been more powerful than them. But Luke and Leia combined are like a dyad, and while the dyad and the Force is something from a movie that a lot of people don't like and a lot of people do like, the dyad that I wanted to use here was a dyad in the Force that was a result from the Force creating twins in one another. It doesn't have to be biological, but the Force would react to these twins as if they were twins in the Force. Like I think we would call them flames, twin flames in our own universe. It's kind of like that. People that are very similar to you, but you don't know why. It's like that. Through the Force, Luke and Leia were very similar in power, in scope, in mind, but it also helped that they were siblings too. And being siblings and being twins allowed them to be these incredible beings of power. I liked having Qui-Gon show up every so often. I didn't want Qui-Gon to be pivotal in the story, but I think him interacting with his great-grand apprentice, which he's like a great-granddaughter, which would be Ahsoka, would be really interesting. I wanted them to have a nice little moment there. Well, while I have to say, I think Vader's turn was a little quick, even for me. I wanted it to be very focused on the fact that the children wouldn't have been able to change his mind until they brought up Padme. If they didn't bring up Padme, it wouldn't have changed his mind. I think he would have still been Vader, and I think he would have still tried to fight them, but he couldn't, because they were holding him back with the Force. They were literally doing that freeze move that we've seen in the movies, in the sequel trilogy by Vader, and I think we saw it in one of the animated series too. I can't remember though. But this Force move that stops the person. You stop them in their tracks. And I think Vader would have been stuck in his tracks by Luke and Leia, and he wouldn't have been able to break out of that because Luke and Leia would have been more powerful than him. And yeah. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this movie. I got another one coming out this week. It's probably going to be just as long, if not longer, so stay tuned for that. I do hope you all enjoyed. Subscribe, join the Patreon, do all the things if you want to support this channel. A huge project coming in the middle of this month, so stay tuned for that. You guys are really gonna like that. Anyways, guys, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this epic story that I have presented to you guys here. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.